Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a great pleasure to stand on behalf of New Zealand First to talk to this bill in the committee stage, and I think we are going to have a very robust discussion, probably a bit of a marathon debate really, and goodness knows how long it's going to last for, because there's so much to go through and go into. Just looking at this, we've got 30 supplementary order papers or amendments on the table for discussion, and I'm sure every single one of those will need to be debated at great length. And I do acknowledge the Minister for tabling the document about the guidance on high-risk industry definition, which I'd just like to start by asking him a question that he might be able to do some clarification. I have actually called into his office, but of course he's down here, so it's very difficult to get an answer. But it's in relation to R913 as far as high-risk industry definitions go, and it's to do with amusements, which I'm assuming is the large slides and Ferris wheels and the likes that can be quite dangerous. But what are other recreation activities? I'd like a little bit of clarification on that. We are waiting to hear back from your office, and if you could just expedite that would certainly help my team in the office.
The Minister's just whispered in my ear that he will answer those as part of the relevant part, in this particular case, part 3.
Thank you.
Clayton Mitchell.
I thought I'd just take the opportunity to bring it up. I appreciate that. Look, I also want to make mention to the families that came through from all over the country to be here to listen to this debate and be in the chamber. And so it's our apologies that it was delayed by a day, and I do believe that it wasn't of anybody's fault. However, I was in the chamber yesterday and listening in the old legislative chamber, listening with a heavy heart to those stories of those fathers, mothers, wives, sisters that wanted to share their stories, and certainly did have tears in my eyes, along with many of the other members and people that were there. And this is what makes so important, getting this piece of legislation right. And it's 2 years overdue. In fact, it's probably 5 years overdue. And I just wanted, before I start talking about specific parts of the bill that we've going to be putting some supplementary order papers to amend this bill, it comes down to the fire service, I guess, with what they have created is the triangle for fire, what creates fire. And to create a fire, you need the oxygen, you need fuel for that fire, and of course you need heat, energy to create it. And if you take any one of those pieces away from that fire triangle, you of course won't have a fire. And health and safety is very similar to that, Mr Chair, insofar as you need to get a good health and safety, 3 parts to make up solid legislation to ensure the safety of workers. And the first thing is worker participation. And we've got to have good engagement with those workers, and those workers have to have a place that they can go to and be heard and make sure that their concerns are actually being adhered to and actioned. So that's the first thing you need. You also need a good employer that understands the importance of making sure that his workplace is a safe environment for his workers to be in, and that he's going to ensure and do everything that he can to ensure that he gets this, which comes under purpose. I can see there's some questions about the purpose of this, to ensure that his workers go home. And the third thing we need, of course, is enforcement around the legislation that's been put there. And if I look at the previous bill that this country has been run under, 2 of those pieces were really were lacking. And in the latest budget, the honourable member came through and allocated $8 million for enforcement officers to ensure that those measures are upheld. And if we rewind now back 5 years to the Pike River disaster, had we had adequate funding and had we had the right resources given to the mine workers around this country, that they had the time, they had the resource to actually enter into those mines and take serious note of the mishaps that were going on, then the Pike River disaster may well not have happened, Mr Chair. And I also have to say, if there was strong, robust place for the workers to go to, that also would actually have negated a lot of these accidents that we have in our workplace. So this new legislation does a lot of that. And we as New Zealand First have some discomfort that we are opposing this bill where it stands as it stands at the moment, and we would like to think that we can find a balanced middle ground, if you like, with some of those areas where we think that the government has gone a little bit too far, a bridge too far, and some areas that they haven't gone far enough. And so that's what I'd like to start by talking about now. So to reduce those fatalities in the next 5 years by 25%, I would like to see that can be reduced even further than that. So that's the first thing. I'd like to see 100% safe workplaces around this country. Who wouldn't? I don't think there's a single person in this country that wouldn't want that. But getting to safe workplaces, I'd like to talk about a supplementary order paper that we've got put forward, and we've put it through to the Select Committee, and I was a little bit disappointed, Mr Chair.
Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you. I was a little bit disappointed, not with Labor and possibly not for Greens, because I understand their position in most things, and I don't mean to be derogatory when I say this. I get you, I get your position is. I was, however, very disappointed, despite having some positive involvement from Mr Bailey and acknowledging the concerns and seeing the sense in what we were trying to say, because he's a pragmatic person. He's a person that has been involved in business, and Mr Young, yourself also in recognition to understand my dilemma. But when I talk to the vast numbers of small, medium and even large businesses around the country that suffer from the lack of personal responsibility by their workers with regards to their personal protective equipment, that this bill could sort that out. Now, I know the Minister himself said there are other legislation matters that can actually bring this up in, but why put it onto somebody else's hand when we've got the opportunity here now to fix up with a sleight of pen to remove this? You say it won't work, I was going to say Mr Chair, Minister, but it will in fact work. The legislation in section 28 says that no worker can be levied or charged for any of their personal protective equipment. We absolutely agree with that. That is common sense. You've got to do a job, you've got to have the equipment. However, there should be onerous circumstances around making sure that those workers look after and protect that personal protective equipment. Don't give it away, don't sell it off, don't forget it at home. Now, we believe that it's not unfair or unreasonable to expect a worker to be levied or charged for unfair wear, tear or loss on their personal protective equipment. Because at the end of the day, who pays for that? Most of those costs get transferred onto the consumer, so the consumer is ultimately paying. But is that about efficiencies of business? I suggest not, and hence I get back to how could National not support this and government to say that let's look after this. If you go to another piece of legislation, we're talking about human resourcing. Again, that's a cost to the business. You've got to go through the process of managing that person out or managing them up to a standard, where if we put in a clause which would eliminate that issue right then and there, that to us is a very pragmatic and sensible solution that will bring down the costs to the consumers. It'll actually make businesses more profitable. The second point, Mr Chair, is section 29AA. And which is a supplementary order paper by New Zealand First also, which is about the insurance against fines being unlawful. Now, you can get indemnity for just about anything. You can insure yourself against loss or wear and tear and so on. And you pay for that. It's a user pays. So why does this legislation not allow for businesses to protect themselves in the uneventful circumstance of a serious accident, that you could actually get that indemnity? Now, if you're a high-risk business, obviously those premiums are going to be higher. And that's a business decision that could be weighed up with the business themselves to decide whether they want to pay a premium on an annual basis or take the risk and try and tighten down that legislation. But the reality is that is up to individuals to decide whether or not they have insurance. And I think that's another key practical step in the section number 1 that would eliminate some of those problems. So to read out the clause, which we've got clause 28, is despite subsection 1, a PCBU may impose a levy or a charge on a worker or permit a levy or charge to be imposed on a worker if any personal protective equipment is persistently lost or damaged by the employee. Now, I don't think any employee in their right mind would think that that's unfair or unreasonable. Take personal responsibility for the things that are going to keep you safe. And then, quite simply, clause 29AA, we look to completely delete clause 29AA, page 39, which again does not allow any employer to insure themselves, indemnify for their financial loss or cost of a potential litigation in future times. Mr Chair, I will be speaking on most of these points today. It is going to be a marathon. My throat's going to probably get a little bit hoarse, so I'll have to grab some lozenges. Thank you very much, Mr Chair.
Denise Roche.